Some stories start with flowers. This one starts with $1 million horse, a mystery emergency, and a millionaire who refuses to lose any race, any argument. The solution? A brilliant veterinarian who's blunt, fearless, and dangerously immune to his charm. The problem? Working too close to someone who challenges you is the kind of risk no insurance covers. Grace Young had seen her share of desperate phone calls in her 7 years as an equine veterinarian, but this one took the cake. 3 in the morning, unknown number. A man's voice tight with barely controlled panic asking if she could come immediately to Parker Estate, the Parker Estate, because his prize stallion was dying and 3 veterinarians had already failed. She should have said no, should have told him to call one of those fancy specialists who charged more per hour than she made in a week, should have rolled over and gone back to sleep in her tiny apartment above the clinic. Instead, she'd said, "Give me the address, I'll be there in 40 minutes. Which was how she found herself at 4 in the morning, driving her beat-up pickup truck down a private road that seemed to go on forever, past white fences that probably cost more than her entire veterinary education, toward a main house that looked like something out of a magazine. Grace parked near what she assumed were the stables, massive structures that put most barns to shame, and grabbed her emergency kit. Her boots were scuffed, her jeans had a stain from yesterday's difficult foaling, and her dark hair was twisted into a messy bun held together by a pencil and sheer determination. The man waiting on the stable steps made her breath catch, which annoyed her immensely. Henry Parker was tall, easily over 6 feet, with dark hair slightly mussed from running his hands through it, sharp jaw shadowed with stubble, and eyes so intensely brown they seemed to see straight through her. He wore jeans that fit entirely too well, and a button-down shirt with sleeves rolled up, revealing forearms that suggested he did actual work, not just signed checks. If this story is touching your heart, show your support. Leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and share it with your friends. Every action helps us keep bringing you new stories full of emotion. He looked her up and down, one eyebrow rising slightly. "Dr. Young, that's what my degree says." Grace hefted her kit. "You mentioned a dying horse? Or did you call me out here at 4 in the morning for a fashion consultation?" His lips twitched, almost a smile, but not quite. "I expected someone more traditional, and I expected a millionaire less full of preconceptions. Seems neither of us is having our expectations met tonight." She gestured toward the stables. The horse. For a moment she thought he might argue. Then he turned and led her inside. The stables were immaculate. Too immaculate, actually, which told Grace that Henry Parker either had an excellent staff or was one of those obsessive owners who drove everyone crazy with perfectionism. Given the tension in his shoulders and the way his jaw clenched every few seconds, she'd bet on the latter. "4th stall on the right," he said, his voice rougher now. Worried, Grace approached the stall and felt her professional calm settle over her, like a familiar coat. Inside, a magnificent black stallion stood with his head lowered, sides heaving, sweat darkening his coat. His eyes were glazed with pain and exhaustion. She could see immediately why 3 veterinarians had failed. The symptoms were subtle, contradictory, the kind of case that required more intuition than textbook knowledge. "What did the others say?" she asked, already moving into the stall. "Everything from colic to poisoning to neurological disorder." Henry stood at the stall door, hands gripping the frame so hard his knuckles had gone white. One wanted to put him down. "Did you punch him?" "Almost." Grace allowed herself a small smile as she set down her kit. "Good instinct. He's not dying." She ran her hands carefully along the stallion's neck, feeling for heat, swelling, any subtle sign. "He's in serious trouble, but he's not dying. Not if I have anything to say about it." "How can you tell?" "Because I'm actually paying attention." She crouched to examine the horse's legs, then stood and moved to check his eyes, his mouth, his breathing pattern. "Your other vets were looking for dramatic symptoms. They missed the small ones." Henry stepped closer, watching her work with an intensity that should have been unnerving but somehow wasn't. "What small ones?" "The way he's favoring his left side, the slight irregularity in his breathing that suggests pain, not respiratory distress. The temperature differential between his shoulders and his hindquarters." Grace pulled out her stethoscope. "And the fact that he's letting me examine him without much fight, which means he's desperate for help, not giving up." She listened to his heart, his lungs, his gut sounds, checked his gums, his pulse, his temperature. All the while she could feel Henry Parker's gaze on her, assessing, calculating, perhaps finally realizing she wasn't some small-town hack who got lucky. "It's not his digestive system," she said finally, "and it's not poisoning, it's inflammatory, probably triggered by something environmental combined with overtraining stress." "Overtraining?" Henry's voice went sharp. "I don't overtrain my horses." Grace looked up at him, one eyebrow raised. "Really? Because his muscle tension suggests otherwise. When was his last rest day?" "He had 3 days off 2 weeks ago." 2 weeks ago doesn't count as rest when you've been pushing for competition season." She stood, brushing hay off her knees. "I need to start him on a specific anti-inflammatory protocol, adjust his feed, and he needs complete stall rest for at least a week, maybe 2. He has a show in 10 days. Then you'll need to scratch him." Grace met his glare head-on. "Unless you'd prefer a dead champion to a live one who misses a show." The silence stretched between them, taut and challenging. Then Henry exhaled slowly, the fight draining from his posture. "Do whatever you need to do." "I will." Grace opened her kit. "But I'm not leaving for at least 48 hours. He needs constant monitoring. I have a guest room. I'll sleep here." She gestured to the tack room. "There's a cot, and I need to be close." Henry studied her for a long moment. "You're serious?" "I don't joke about my patients, Mr. Parker." "Henry," he said it quietly, "if you're going to be saving my horse and sleeping in my stable, you should probably call me Henry." Grace looked up from preparing the first injection. In the dim, stable lighting, with worry creased into his features and genuine gratitude softening those sharp eyes, Henry Parker looked less like an arrogant millionaire and more like a man who genuinely cared about his animals. Dangerous. That observation was definitely dangerous. "Fine," she said, "but you're getting me decent coffee in the morning, Henry." This time he actually smiled. "Deal, Grace." And something in her chest fluttered in a way that had absolutely nothing to do with the horse, and everything to do with the man watching her like she was both miracle worker and mystery he wanted to solve. This was going to be complicated. Grace woke to the sound of horses nickering softly and the rich, blessed scent of coffee. Good coffee, not the cheap instant stuff she usually made in her clinic's tiny break room. She sat up on the tack room cot, wincing as her back protested. Sleeping on a cot at 28 wasn't quite as easy as it had been during her internship years. Her hair had completely escaped its bun and now hung in tangled waves around her shoulders, and she was pretty sure there was hay stuck to her cheek. "You look like you lost a fight with the tack room." Grace's head snapped up. Henry stood in the doorway, holding 2 steaming mugs and looking unfairly put together for, she checked her watch, 6:30 in the morning. He'd showered, changed into fresh jeans and a dark Henley that emphasized his shoulders, and had apparently made coffee strong enough to wake the dead. "I won that fight, thank you very much," Grace said, taking the offered mug and inhaling deeply. "The tack room just doesn't know how to lose gracefully." He almost smiled again. She was starting to enjoy those almost smiles, which was problematic. "How's he doing?" "See for yourself." Grace led him to the stallion's stall, still holding her coffee like a lifeline. The horse had his head up now, eyes clearer, and was actually showing interest in the special feed she'd mixed at 3 in the morning. "Temperature's down, breathing's normalized, and he's eating. He'll need another week of treatment, but he's going to be fine." Henry's relief was palpable. He reached over the stall door to stroke the stallion's neck, and Grace noticed his hand was trembling slightly. "Thank God." "Thank medical science and the fact that I actually paid attention in school," Grace corrected, but her tone was gentle. She could see how much this animal meant to him. "What's his name?" "Midnight Legacy." Henry's voice softened. "My grandfather bred his great-grandfather. This bloodline, it's everything." Grace studied him over her coffee mug. There was a story there, layered and deep. But before she could decide whether to ask, footsteps approached. "Henry David Parker, are you bothering that poor girl already?" The woman who appeared was somewhere in her late 50s, grey hair pulled back in a neat bun, wearing slacks and a cardigan despite the warm morning. Her eyes were sharp, kind, and thoroughly amused as she looked between Grace and Henry. "Martha, this is Dr. Young," Henry said. "Grace, this is Martha Hayes, my housekeeper, and the only person who's allowed to middle name me." "Housekeeper?" Martha snorted. I raised this boy from 15 years old. I'm more like his parole officer. She turned to Grace, sizing her up with one sweep. You're the miracle worker who saved Midnight. I'm the veterinarian who knew what to look for, Grace corrected, but she couldn't help smiling at Martha's directness. Humble, too. I like her already. Martha gave Henry a pointed look that Grace couldn't quite interpret. When was the last time you ate, young lady? Grace tried to remember. Yesterday? Lunch, maybe? Martha made a disapproving sound. Both of you, main house now. I made breakfast, and I won't have people collapsing in my stables because they forgot basic human needs. I need to monitor. The horse is stable, yes? Martha's tone brooked no argument. And you have alarm monitors set up? Grace did, actually. Well, yes, but then you can eat breakfast like a civilized person while watching the monitors. Come on, Henry, carry her kit. I can carry my own. Grace started, but Henry was already picking up her medical bag with one hand, his other gesturing for her to go ahead. Don't fight her, he said quietly. You won't win. I've been trying for 20 years. Smart boy, Martha called over her shoulder. As they walked toward the main house, Grace became acutely aware of how she must look. Rumpled, hay-covered, probably with impressive dark circles under her eyes. Henry, walking beside her, looked like he'd stepped out of a catalogue for ridiculously attractive horse breeders. The main house was even more impressive inside. Hardwood floors, expensive rugs, artwork that was probably original. But it wasn't cold or museum-like. There were photos everywhere, Henry with horses, with an elderly man who must have been his grandfather, winning ribbons at shows. The furniture was quality but comfortable. It felt lived in, loved. Bathrooms down the hall if you want to freshen up, Henry said, and Grace was grateful he phrased it as option rather than desperate necessity. She locked herself in what was possibly the nicest bathroom she'd ever seen and stared at her reflection. Her hair was a disaster. There was indeed hay on her cheek, and also in her hair and possibly inside her shirt. Her face was pale with exhaustion, and her eyes looked huge without makeup. This is fine, she told her reflection. You're here professionally. It doesn't matter that he's unfairly attractive and apparently kind to animals and has a sweet relationship with his housekeeper. You're leaving as soon as Midnight is stable enough. Her reflection looked skeptical. Grace did her best to make herself presentable, which meant pulling her hair into a fresh bun, washing her face and removing all visible hay. She couldn't do anything about her wrinkled clothes or tired eyes, so she decided to own it. When she returned to the kitchen, Martha had outdone herself. Scrambled eggs, bacon, fresh fruit, toast, and what looked like homemade cinnamon rolls covered the large oak table. I don't usually cook like this, Martha said, catching Grace's expression. But we have a guest, and Henry hasn't eaten properly in 3 days worrying about that horse. Henry, sitting at the table with his own coffee, shot Martha a look that suggested they'd had this conversation before. Grace sat down across from him and tried not to stare at the spread. This is incredible, thank you. You saved Midnight, Martha said simply. It's the least I can do. As they ate, Grace became aware of Henry watching her. Not creepily, more like he was trying to figure out a puzzle. It should have made her uncomfortable, but instead she found herself matching his gaze, raising one eyebrow in challenge. What? She finally asked. You're not what I expected, he said. You mentioned that last night. What exactly were you expecting? Someone older, more male, with better hair? All of the above, probably. He had the grace to look slightly embarrassed. Every equine vet I've worked with has been over 50 and treated me like I didn't know anything about my own horses. Do you know anything about your own horses? Martha choked on her coffee. Henry's eyes widened, then narrowed. Excuse me? It's a valid question. Grace took a bite of cinnamon roll, which was possibly the best thing she'd ever tasted. You called me at 3 in the morning in a panic. You let your horse get to the point of crisis. You push for competitions without adequate rest periods. So I'm asking, do you actually know your horses or do you just own them? The silence was thick enough to cut. Martha was watching them both with undisguised interest, making no effort to intervene. Finally, Henry set down his fork. Come with me. But breakfast, bring it. He stood, picking up his own plate. I want to show you something. Grace looked at Martha, who shrugged and smiled in a way that suggested this was exactly what she'd hoped would happen. Complicated, Grace thought again. This whole situation was definitely, absolutely, undeniably complicated, and part of her, the part that had nothing to do with professional veterinary medicine, was starting to think that might not be a bad thing. Henry led Grace to a different section of the stables, carrying his breakfast plate like this was perfectly normal behavior. She followed, partly out of curiosity and partly because the cinnamon roll was too good to abandon. He stopped at a stall where a chestnut mare stood with her newborn foal, barely 3 days old by Grace's estimation. "This is Autumn's Promise. She foaled Tuesday night." "Congratulations?" Grace wasn't sure where this was going. "She had complications. Breech birth. Took 4 hours." Henry set his plate on a nearby shelf and opened the stall door. The mare immediately walked over to him, nuzzling his shoulder with clear affection. "I was here the whole time. No vet because we couldn't wait. I had to turn the foal myself." Grace felt her eyebrows rise. Turning a breech foal was delicate, dangerous work. "You did that alone?" "My grandfather taught me when I was 16. Henry's hands moved gently over the mare, checking her condition with the practiced ease of someone who'd done this 1,000 times. "He said if I was going to breed horses, I needed to understand every aspect, so I learned how to deliver foals, recognize colic, treat minor injuries, understand body language, read their moods." He moved to the foal, who was still wobbly on its long legs. The little one didn't shy away, but instead leaned into Henry's touch, completely trusting. "This is Thunder's Echo. He'll be a champion someday if I don't screw it up." Grace watched him, reassessing everything. The way he touched the animals wasn't the casual petting of a rich owner. It was the confident, knowledgeable contact of someone who understood horses on a fundamental level. "That mare over there," Henry pointed to the next stall, "Willow's Dream. She has anxiety issues, spooks easily. Most trainers wanted to sell her. I spent 6 months earning her trust, learning what triggers her fear, teaching her she's safe." He looked at Grace directly, and the intensity in his gaze made her breath catch. "The gelding in the corner paddock has arthritis. We manage it with specific exercises and medication. The grey filly in stall 12 has a tendency to colic if her feeding schedule changes even slightly, so we maintain strict routine." He walked down the aisle, and Grace followed, listening as he described each horse by name, personality, quirks, medical history. He knew which one liked having her ears scratched, which one needed extra encouragement, which one would steal your hat if you weren't careful. "That stallion," Henry gestured to a stall near the end, "that's Midnight's son. He inherited his father's speed but also his stubborn streak. He'll only work with 2 trainers because he doesn't respect easily. But when you earn his trust," Henry's expression softened, "he'll run through fire for you." Grace stood in the middle of the stable, breakfast forgotten, feeling like an idiot. "I apologize." "For what?" "For assuming you were just another rich guy playing cowboy." She met his eyes. "You actually know what you're doing." Henry's lips curved into something that was definitely a smile this time. "I screwed up with Midnight. You were right about the overtraining. I got caught up in competition schedules and forgot to listen to what he was telling me." He moved closer, and Grace was suddenly very aware of how tall he was. "But I didn't forget because I don't care. I forgot because I care too much and stopped trusting my instincts." "Why?" The question came out softer than she intended. "Because the last 3 vets I worked with made me feel like I didn't know anything. Dismissed every concern, talked over me, treated me like I was just the guy who signed checks." His jaw tightened. "After a while, you start doubting yourself." Grace understood that feeling more than she wanted to admit. For what it's worth, your instincts were right. You knew something was wrong with Midnight before it became critical. You just needed someone to listen. You listened. He said it simply, but there was weight behind the words. "You took me seriously." "Of course I did. You called me at 3 in the morning, desperate and scared. That's not the behavior of someone who doesn't care." She smiled slightly. "Besides, anyone who hand-delivers a breech foal alone deserves respect." Henry studied her face for a long moment, something shifting in his expression. "Want to see something else? Is it more impressive than manual foal delivery?" "Different impressive." He headed toward the back exit. "Come on." They walked through the property, past immaculate paddocks and training areas, until they reached a more rustic section. Older fences, a weathered barn, everything maintained but clearly vintage. "This was my grandfather's original stable," Henry said, opening the barn door. He started with 3 horses and a dream. Built this himself, one board at a time. Inside, the barn was full of old equipment, photos, ribbons from decades past. But what caught Grace's attention was the office area, a small desk covered in breeding journals, training logs, and handwritten notes in faded ink. He documented everything, Henry said, reverence in his voice. Every birth, every training session, every success and failure. When he got sick, I spent 6 months reading through all of it, learning everything he never had time to teach me properly. Grace picked up one of the journals, carefully turning the aged pages. The handwriting was meticulous, the observations detailed and thoughtful. He sounds like he was brilliant. He was. Henry's voice roughened. He was also the only family who gave a damn about me. My parents shipped me off to boarding schools from age 6. He's the one who brought me here every summer, taught me what actually matters. Grace looked up at him, seeing past the confident millionaire to the lonely kid who'd found belonging in a stable. How old were you when he passed? 22. He left me everything, the business, the property, the horses. Henry leaned against the desk, arms crossed. Also left me a note saying not to be an idiot, find someone who loves this life as much as I do, and build something real. Good advice. I thought so. Haven't been very successful at the finding someone part. He glanced at her, something unreadable in his expression. Most women take one look at my lifestyle and run. The ones who don't run usually care more about my bank account than my horses. Grace set down the journal carefully. That's depressing. That's reality. He pushed off the desk. I've accepted it. The horses don't care about my emotional baggage, they just want carrots and consistent care. You're not seriously planning to die alone surrounded by horses, are you? Sounds better than marrying someone who'll leave the moment life gets complicated. He said it lightly, but Grace heard the hurt underneath. For someone so smart about horses, you're kind of dumb about people. Henry's eyebrows shot up. Excuse me? Not all women are gold diggers or afraid of hard work. Grace walked closer, poking him in the chest. Some of us actually like getting our hands dirty. Some of us spent our childhoods in stables because our fathers worked on ranches. Some of us chose this career specifically because we love it, not despite the challenges. He caught her hand before she could poke him again, his fingers warm and calloused around hers. Are we still talking about hypothetical women, or are you trying to tell me something, Dr. Young? Grace's heart did something complicated in her chest. Standing this close, she could see the flecks of gold in his brown eyes, the slight scar on his chin, the way his pulse jumped in his throat. I'm telling you, she said, not backing down despite how fast her heart was beating, that you shouldn't give up on finding someone who gets it. Someone who sees the person behind the bank account. Someone who... She trailed off, realizing she was describing herself and feeling her cheeks heat. Henry's thumb brushed across her knuckles, a touch so gentle it made her shiver. Someone who argues with me at 4 in the morning and saves my horse's life while looking like she fought the tack room. Exactly like that, Grace whispered. He leaned closer, and for one wild moment she thought he might kiss her. Instead, he released her hand and stepped back, running his fingers through his hair. We should get back. You need to check on Midnight. Right. The horse. Her patient. Her job. Grace nodded, trying to ignore the disappointment curling in her stomach. Yeah, professional responsibility and all that. They walked back in silence, but it wasn't uncomfortable. It was charged, anticipatory, like the moment before a storm breaks. And Grace had the distinct feeling that this particular storm was going to change everything. Grace had been staying at Parker Estate for 3 days, and she was starting to realize that living in close proximity to Henry Parker was hazardous to her professional composure. It wasn't just that he was attractive, though he was, annoyingly so. It was the little things. The way he brought her coffee every morning without being asked, somehow remembering she liked it with just a splash of cream. The way he'd roll up his sleeves and help her with treatments, following her instructions without his ego getting in the way. The way he'd absently touch her lower back when passing her in the stable aisle. A casual gesture that made her entire nervous system light up. She was in serious trouble. You're staring again! Grace jumped, nearly dropping the syringe she was preparing. Jake Morrison, the estate's head trainer and apparently the world's most observant pain in the ass, leaned against the stall door with a knowing grin. I'm concentrating, Grace said with as much dignity as she could muster. On the medication or on the boss's backside? Jake's grin widened. Because from where I'm standing, you've been concentrating on Henry for the last 5 minutes while he worked with the new colt. Grace felt her cheeks heat. I'm observing his training techniques. Professional interest. Uh-huh. Jake was in his early 30s with sandy hair, laugh lines around his eyes, and the kind of personality that made him both beloved and insufferable. Sure. And I'm observing that you observe his techniques about 40 times a day. Don't you have horses to train? Already done. Now I'm entertaining myself watching this situation. He gestured between Grace and where Henry was working in the training ring. It's better than Netflix. Will they? Won't they? When will they stop dancing around the obvious? Grace turned to glare at him properly. There's no they or situation. I'm his veterinarian. Who sleeps in his stable? Because my patient needs monitoring. Who has breakfast with him every morning? Because Martha insists. Who looks at him like he hung the moon and personally trained every star to shine brighter? Jake's expression softened slightly. Grace, I've worked here for 8 years. I've never seen Henry look at anyone the way he looks at you. Grace's heart did that complicated thing again. You're imagining things. I'm really not. Jake pushed off the stall door. But hey, if you want to keep pretending there's no chemistry between you two, be my guest. Just know that Martha and I have a bet going on when you finally kiss, and I picked Friday. So if you could move things along... Get out of my stable, Grace said, but she was fighting a smile. Technically, it's Henry's stable, Jake called over his shoulder, and for what it's worth, you're good for him. I haven't seen him this happy in years. Grace stood there, syringe forgotten, watching through the stable entrance as Henry worked with the young colt. He moved with such natural grace, such genuine connection with the animal. The colt, barely 2 years old, followed his commands not out of fear, but out of trust. As if sensing her gaze, Henry looked up. Their eyes met across the distance and he smiled, a real full smile that transformed his entire face. Grace felt that smile all the way to her toes. She was definitely in trouble. Later that afternoon, Grace was updating her treatment notes when Martha appeared with a picnic basket. What's this? Grace asked. Lunch for you and Henry. He's been out in the south paddock checking fences all morning. Martha's expression was innocently neutral, which immediately made Grace suspicious. I thought you could bring it to him. Get some fresh air. Definitely not spend quality time alone together under the oak trees. Martha. Just delivering food, dear. What happens after that is between you and God. Martha pressed the basket into Grace's hands. There's enough for 2, and I may have included wine. For medical purposes, of course. Medical purposes, Grace repeated flatly. Stress relief. Very therapeutic. Martha's eyes twinkled. The south paddock has lovely shade this time of day. Very romantic, very cool, temperature-wise. Grace couldn't help laughing. You're terrible at subtlety. Never saw the point of it. Martha patted her arm. That boy has been alone too long. And you, my dear, look at him like he's the answer to a question you didn't know you were asking. Don't waste time overthinking things. Before Grace could respond, Martha bustled away, leaving her holding a picnic basket and a dangerous hope. The walk to the south paddock took 15 minutes through beautiful rolling pastures. Grace found Henry exactly where Martha said he'd be, shirtless and sweaty from working on a fence post in the afternoon heat. She stopped walking, her brain temporarily short-circuiting. Henry Parker apparently looked like that under his clothes. Broad shoulders, defined muscles that came from actual work rather than gym vanity, a light scatter of chest hair, abs that should be illegal. A tattoo on his left shoulder blade looked like a horse in mid-gallop with dates beneath it, probably his grandfather's birth and death. You okay there, Doc? Grace's eyes snapped up to Henry's face. He was watching her with undisguised amusement, clearly aware she'd been staring. Martha sent lunch. Did she? Henry grabbed his shirt from the fence post but didn't put it on, which Grace decided was a personal attack. She's been conspiring with Jake, hasn't she? Apparently we're everyone's entertainment. Could be worse. He took the basket, his fingers brushing hers in a way that felt entirely deliberate. We could be boring. They settled under a massive oak tree, and Martha had indeed packed enough food for a small army. Sandwiches, fresh fruit, cookies, and yes, wine with actual glasses. She's not subtle, Henry said, pouring them each a glass. Jake's worse. He told me he has a bet with Martha about when we'll kiss. Grace accepted the wine, then realized what she'd said. I mean, not that we're going to kiss. That was just Jake being ridiculous. Henry's lips quirked. Friday, huh? What? That's when Jake thinks it'll happen. Martha picked Saturday. He took a sip of wine, watching her over the rim of his glass. I'd tell you when I picked, but that seems like it might be presumptuous. Grace's heart was doing gymnastics. You have a bet too? I have a hope. He set down his glass, suddenly serious. Grace, His phone rang. Henry closed his eyes, jaw clenching. I need to take this. It's my lawyer about the breeding contract. Of course. Grace tried not to feel disappointed as he walked a few feet away. She could hear him talking, professional and curt, clearly wanting the conversation to end. While she waited, she noticed his shirt still lying on the grass where he'd dropped it. Without thinking, she picked it up, intending to fold it properly. Something fell out of the pocket, a small worn piece of paper folded many times. Grace knew she shouldn't look, but curiosity won. She unfolded it carefully. The handwriting was shaky with age. Don't be an idiot. When you find the right one, you'll know. Don't let her get away. Grandpa Grace's throat tightened. She refolded the note carefully, tucking it back into the shirt pocket just as Henry returned. Sorry about that, he said, running a hand through his hair. Where were we? You were being presumptuous, Grace said softly, her heart making decisions her brain hadn't approved yet. About having hopes. Henry sat down beside her, closer than before. Was I wrong to hope? Grace looked at this man who carried his grandfather's advice in his pocket, who knew every horse by name, who brought her coffee and looked at her like she mattered. No, she whispered. You weren't wrong. The air between them felt electric. Henry reached up slowly, giving her every chance to pull away. His fingers brushed a strand of hair from her face, tucking it behind her ear. The touch was feather light, but burned. Grace, Henry! Jake's voice shattered the moment. He was running toward them, phone in hand. We've got a problem. The mare in stall 6 is showing signs of colic. Just like that, the moment was gone. Henry was on his feet, all business. Grace grabbed her emergency kit she'd thankfully brought, and they both ran toward the stables. As they ran, Jake shot Grace an apologetic look. I'm really sorry. Terrible timing. It's fine, Grace said, though her heart was still pounding for entirely non-medical reasons. The horse comes first. But as she worked to treat the colicky mare, she was hyper-aware of Henry beside her, and the conversation they'd almost had, and the touch that had promised so much more. Friday, she thought, or Saturday, or maybe, hopefully, soon. 2 weeks had passed since Grace first arrived at Parker Estate, and Midnight Legacy was making a full recovery, which meant Grace should probably return to her own practice, her own apartment, her own life that didn't revolve around a certain infuriating millionaire who made her heart race every time he smiled. Should, but somehow hadn't. Henry had officially hired her as the estate's consulting veterinarian, which gave her a legitimate professional reason to stay. The fact that she was also falling dangerously close to something that felt a lot like love was just an inconvenient side effect she tried very hard not to think about. Stop fidgeting, Martha said, appearing beside Grace as she checked supplies in the medical room. You've reorganized that cabinet 3 times this morning. I'm being thorough. You're stalling. Martha's knowing look made Grace want to hide. Henry asked you to let him teach you his grandfather's riding techniques. That was 2 days ago. You've been avoiding him. Grace had been avoiding him, ever since the almost kiss under the oak tree, followed by another almost moment in the stable at sunset, and yet another interrupted by Jake needing help with a spooked horse. She'd been keeping careful distance. Because every time they got close, every time those brown eyes looked at her like she was something precious, she felt herself falling deeper. And falling for Henry Parker felt terrifying. I don't need riding lessons, Grace said, which was technically true. She'd grown up around horses. I know how to ride. That's not what he wants to teach you, and you know it. Martha's expression softened. That boy is trying to share something sacred with you. His grandfather's methods, his history, his heart, and you're hiding in the supply room. I'm not hiding. Grace Elizabeth Young, are you afraid of horses or afraid of how you feel about the man who works with them? Grace opened her mouth, closed it, slumped against the counter. The second one. Good. Honesty is progress. Martha patted her arm. Now stop being a coward and go find him. He's at the private training ring. Henry was exactly where Martha said he'd be, working with a gorgeous grey mare in a secluded training area Grace hadn't seen before. The ring was surrounded by flowering trees, private and peaceful, clearly meant for special work. He spotted her immediately, his entire face lighting up in a way that made her stomach flip. "You came." "I've been busy," Grace said, which was a lie, and they both knew it. "Right. Busy." Henry's tone was dry but not unkind. He gestured to the mare. "This is Silver Song. She's the gentlest horse I own and perfect for what I want to show you." "Henry, I already know how to ride." "I know you do." He led Silver Song over, stopping close enough that Grace could smell his cologne mixed with horse and leather. But this isn't about basic riding. It's about connection, about understanding the horse's language, reading their intentions, becoming partners instead of just rider and mount. Grace looked up at him, seeing the vulnerability in his eyes. He was offering her something important, something he'd never shared with anyone outside his grandfather. "Okay," she said softly. "Teach me." The smile he gave her could have powered the entire state. Henry helped her mount Silver Song, his hands lingering on her waist longer than strictly necessary. Then, in one fluid movement, he swung up behind her, settling into the saddle with their bodies pressed together. Grace forgot how to breathe. "Relax," Henry murmured, his voice rumbling through his chest into her back. "She can feel your tension." That was the problem. Grace was tense because Henry's muscular thighs bracketed hers. His chest was solid and warm against her spine, and his arms came around her to rest his hands over hers on the reins. "Feel her breathing?" His breath was hot against her ear. "Match your rhythm to hers." Grace tried. She really did. But between the horse's steady breathing and Henry's very different effect on her respiratory system, she was completely lost. "You're not breathing," Henry observed, and she could hear the smile in his voice. "Your fault," Grace muttered. His quiet laugh sent shivers down her spine. "Fair enough. Let me rephrase. Try to focus on the horse, not on me. Easier said than done when you're—" She gestured vaguely behind her at all of him. "When I'm what?" His hands tightened slightly over hers. "Distracting you, Dr. Young?" "Extremely." She gave up pretending. "Is this really about the horse, or were you just looking for an excuse to get this close?" "Can't it be both?" His lips brushed her ear as he spoke, whether accidentally or deliberately she couldn't tell. "Now stop trying to think your way through this. Feel it. Close your eyes." Grace closed her eyes, hyper-aware of every point of contact between them. Henry's thighs pressed against hers. His chest rose and fell against her back. His hands, rough and warm, covered hers completely. "Good," he murmured. "Now feel Silver Song. Her muscles, her movement, her intention. She's going to turn left before I cue her. Can you feel it?" Grace focused, trying to separate her awareness of Henry from her awareness of the horse beneath them. And there, a subtle shift in Silver Song's weight, a slight tension in her left shoulder. "She's turning," Grace whispered, and sure enough the mare began a smooth left turn without any visible signal from Henry. "You felt it." Henry's voice was warm with approval, his hands squeezing hers gently. "That's the connection. That's what my grandfather taught me, to feel rather than force, to partner rather than dominate." They spent the next hour like that, Henry guiding her through subtle cues and responses, teaching her to read the horse's intentions before they became actions. It was intimate in a way Grace hadn't expected, this shared focus, this trust. At some point, Henry's hands left the reins to rest on her hips, steadying her as Silver Song moved through more complex patterns. His thumbs traced slow circles on her hip bones through her jeans, and Grace was absolutely certain it wasn't accidental. "Henry," she said, her voice coming out breathier than intended. I think I'm supposed to be learning about horses." "You are learning about horses." His lips were definitely closer to her neck now. "It's not my fault you're a very distracting student." "I'm distracting." Grace twisted slightly to look at him, which was a mistake because it brought their faces inches apart. Henry's eyes darkened, his gaze dropping to her lips. "Extremely." The horse stopped moving, sensing the shift in attention. They sat there, frozen in the moment, the world narrowing to just the two of them, and the question hanging in the air between them. "Grace." Henry started, one hand coming up to cup her jaw. Henry, Grace, where are you guys? Grace had never wanted to murder Jake Morrison more in her entire life. Henry dropped his forehead to her shoulder with a groan of frustration. I'm going to fire him. Please don't. He's terrible at timing, but the horses love him. Grace was trying very hard not to laugh at Henry's misery. And to be fair, he's interrupted us like 4 times now. Maybe the universe is trying to tell us something. The universe needs to mind its own business, Henry muttered, but he was dismounting, helping her down with careful hands. To be continued? Definitely to be continued, Grace agreed, and the promise in those words made her heart race. They walked back to find Jake looking sheepish. Sorry, but there's a buyer here for 3 of the yearlings. He's early and insistent about seeing them immediately. Henry sighed, running a hand through his hair. Of course he is. He looked at Grace apologetically. I need to handle this, but tonight... Tonight, Grace agreed. As Henry strode off toward the main barn, Jake fell into step beside Grace. I'm really sorry. I know I'm the worst wingman in history. You truly are. In my defense, a billionaire showing up unannounced demanding to see horses is kind of a big deal. Jake paused. But for what it's worth, you two were adorable out there. Like, disgustingly cute. Martha and I were watching from the hayloft. Grace stopped walking. You were spying on us? Observing supportively, Jake corrected. There's a difference. And Martha cried a little. She's very invested in Henry's happiness. This entire estate is invested in our relationship, because we all care about him. Jake's expression turned serious. Henry's been alone for a long time, Grace, surrounded by people but alone where it counts. Then you showed up and suddenly he's smiling again, laughing again, hopeful again. So yeah, we're invested, and we're not subtle about it. Grace felt her throat tighten. What if I screw it up? What if I'm not? You won't, and you are. Jake squeezed her shoulder. Whatever you're worried about, stop. That man is crazy about you, and unless I'm blind, you feel the same way. Grace thought about Henry's laugh, his gentleness with the horses, the way he looked at her like she was the answer to every question he'd been afraid to ask. Yeah, she admitted softly. I really do. Good, Jake grinned. Now go take a shower and put on something nice. Henry's planning something for tonight, and I'm under strict orders to make sure you don't have any emergency calls. He's planning something? Would it be a surprise if I told you? Jake was already walking away. 8 o'clock, main house. Don't be late. Grace stood in the stable yard, heart racing, terrified and exhilarated in equal measure. Tonight. Something was going to happen tonight. She just hoped the universe would finally let them have one uninterrupted moment. Grace stood in front of the mirror in the guest room Martha had insisted she use, staring at her reflection with growing panic. She'd brought exactly 0 appropriate clothes for a romantic dinner. Her wardrobe consisted of work jeans, scrub tops, 1 pair of slightly nicer jeans, and the clothes she'd been wearing when she arrived 2 weeks ago. Nothing said, I'm falling for you and tonight feels important, quite like veterinary scrubs. A knock on the door interrupted her fashion crisis. Come in. Martha entered carrying a garment bag and a knowing smile. Thought you might need this. Martha, you're a lifesaver. I know. Martha unzipped the bag to reveal a beautiful sundress in deep emerald green, simple but elegant. My niece left this here last summer. You're about the same size, and the color will be perfect with your eyes. Grace touched the soft fabric reverently. It's gorgeous. So are you, dear. Henry certainly thinks so. Martha set the bag on the bed. He's been pacing in the kitchen for the last hour, checking his watch every 30 seconds. I haven't seen him this nervous since his first championship competition at 17. What if I'm reading this wrong? Grace's old insecurities crept in. What if he's just being friendly, and I'm making it into something more? Grace. Martha took both her hands. That boy looks at you like you're his personal sunrise after a lifetime of darkness. He's not being friendly. He's being in love. The word hung in the air. Love. Was that what this feeling was? This constant awareness of Henry, the way her heart lifted every time he entered a room, the way she'd started thinking of the estate as home. I'm scared, Grace admitted. Good. That means it matters. Martha squeezed her hands. Now get dressed. He's made something special for you. Grace descended the stairs at 8 o'clock exactly, heart pounding. The sundress fit perfectly, and she'd left her hair down in loose waves instead of her usual practical bun. She felt feminine and nervous and hopeful all at once. Henry stood at the bottom of the stairs, and the look on his face made every moment of anxiety worth it. "Wow," he breathed, his eyes traveling over her with undisguised admiration. "Grace, you're... wow." Articulate, she teased, but her cheeks were warm. "You clean up pretty well yourself." He did. Dark slacks, a button-down shirt in charcoal grey that made his eyes look impossibly deep, sleeves rolled up to reveal those forearms she'd become slightly obsessed with. His hair was styled but still a bit messy, like he'd run his hands through it nervously. He seemed genuinely flustered, which was adorable. "I made dinner, or tried to." Martha supervised to prevent disaster. "You cooked?" "Attempted to cook, there's a difference." He offered his arm. "Shall we?" He led her through the house to a back terrace she'd never seen before. String lights hung overhead, creating a canopy of soft, golden light. A table was set for two, with actual china and candles. Soft music played from speakers hidden somewhere in the garden. "Henry," Grace whispered, taking in the scene. "This is beautiful. I wanted—" He pulled out her chair, his hands gentle on her shoulders as she sat. "I wanted to do something special. You've been here for 2 weeks and we keep almost talking about things. But we get interrupted, or I lose my nerve, or the universe conspires against us." "The universe has terrible timing," Grace agreed. Henry sat across from her, and for a moment they just looked at each other, the air between them charged with possibility. "I should explain about the food," Henry said, suddenly nervous again. "I made pasta. It's one of 3 dishes I can actually cook without burning down the kitchen. The other 2 are scrambled eggs and grilled cheese, so you're getting the fancy option." Grace laughed, some of her tension easing. "Pasta sounds perfect." He served them both, his movements careful. The pasta actually looked good. Homemade Alfredo with chicken and vegetables, a far cry from her usual frozen dinners. "This is delicious," Grace said after the first bite, genuine surprise in her voice. "You don't have to sound so shocked. You're a millionaire horse breeder who hand-delivers foals and apparently makes amazing pasta. You're kind of annoyingly perfect." Henry nearly choked on his wine. "Perfect? Grace, I've spent 2 weeks trying to figure out how to tell you I'm falling for you, and I've failed every single time. I've had approximately 16 perfect opportunities, and I've blown all of them." Grace's heart stopped, then started again, double time. "You're falling for me? Is that really a surprise?" He set down his fork, leaning forward. "You waltzed into my stable at 4 in the morning, argued with me, saved Midnight's life, and proceeded to turn my entire world upside down. You make me laugh. You challenge me. You see the horses, not the bank account. You—" He ran a hand through his hair. "You make me want things I'd given up on." "What things?" "Partnership. Connection. Someone to share this life with who actually understands it." His eyes were intense in the candlelight. "Someone who doesn't need me to be anything other than what I am." Grace felt tears prickling her eyes. "Henry, A phone rang. Henry's phone sitting on the table between them. He glanced at it, then back to her. "I'm not answering that. It could be important." "I don't care." But the phone kept ringing, insistent and shrill. Henry finally looked at the screen and cursed under his breath. "It's the buyer from earlier, the billionaire. If I don't answer, he'll call Jake, who'll come find me." "Answer it," Grace said, trying to hide her disappointment. Henry answered, his jaw tight. Grace watched his expression change from annoyance to confusion to anger. "What do you mean she'll only sell if I agree to her terms?" Pause. "No, absolutely not. I don't care if it's the best breeding mare in the country." Longer pause. "I need to think about it. I'll call you back." He ended the call and stared at his phone like it had personally betrayed him. "What's wrong?" Grace asked. "There's a mare for sale. Incredible bloodlines, perfect temperament, exactly what I need to expand the breeding program." He looked up at her, frustration clear in his expression. "The owner will only sell to me if I agree to bring her to an upcoming gala. As my date." Grace felt something cold settle in her stomach. A gala. High society nonsense. Lots of wealthy people pretending to care about horses while actually networking and showing off. He set his phone down firmly. "I'll find another mare. This one's not worth it. Henry, if it's the perfect horse, it's not worth sacrificing this." He gestured between them. "Whatever this is, whatever it's becoming, I'm not risking it for business." Grace's heart swelled, but her practical side kicked in. It's one gala. If the horse is really that important to the breeding program. Grace, the owner is Vivian Ashworth. She's been trying to get her claws into me for 3 years. Henry's expression was grim. She's manipulative, calculating, and the last time I attended an event with her, she spent the entire night introducing me as her future husband to anyone who would listen. Oh. Yeah. Oh. He reached across the table, taking her hand. So no, absolutely not. I'll find another way. But Grace could see the conflict in his eyes. She knew how much the breeding program meant to him, how carefully he planned each generation, how much pride he took in maintaining his grandfather's legacy. What if I went with you? The words were out before she could second-guess them. To the gala, not as your veterinarian, as your date, your real date. Henry's eyes widened. You'd do that? If it means you get the horse you need and I get to see you in a tuxedo? Grace smiled, trying to lighten the mood. That seems like a fair trade. I don't have a tuxedo. Even better, I get to see you shop for one. Henry laughed, but his grip on her hand tightened. Grace, these events are brutal. Gossip, judgment, people trying to figure out who you are and what you're worth. I grew up poor in a small town, Henry. I'm familiar with judgment. She turned her hand in his, lacing their fingers together. Besides, I'll have you there, and according to Jake and Martha, you're crazy about me, so I figure you'll be appropriately threatening to anyone who gets rude. Jake has a big mouth, Henry muttered, but he was smiling. Are you sure about this? No, Grace admitted. I'm terrified, but I'm also starting to realize that the things worth having are usually the things that scare us most. Henry stood, still holding her hand, and pulled her up with him. They were close now, close enough that she could see the gold flecks in his eyes, close enough to feel the warmth radiating from him. Grace Young, he said softly, his free hand coming up to cup her cheek. You are the most incredible woman I've ever met. You're not so bad yourself, Henry Parker. He leaned closer, his thumb brushing her cheekbone. Grace's eyes fluttered closed, her heart racing. Finally, Boss Grace, oh crap, not again. They jumped apart as Jake came running onto the terrace, looking genuinely apologetic this time. I am so sorry, but we have a situation. One of the pregnant mares is in distress. Grace, I think she's going into premature labor. Grace was already moving, professional instincts overriding everything else. Which mare? Willow's Dream. Grace's eyes met Henry's. The anxious mare with trust issues. This would be complicated. Duty calls, Henry said, but his hand found hers again for one brief squeeze. Rain check on that moment? So many rain checks, Grace agreed. We're going to run out of rain at this rate. Henry laughed despite the situation, pressing a quick kiss to her forehead that somehow felt more intimate than a real kiss would have. Come on, let's go save a horse. As they ran toward the stables, Grace's heart was still racing, but now for entirely different reasons. And despite the interrupted evening, despite the crisis ahead, she couldn't stop smiling, because Henry had said he was falling for her, and she was definitely, absolutely, terrifyingly falling right back. The premature foaling took 8 hours, 8 grueling hours of Grace working to keep both Willow's Dream and her tiny foal alive, while Henry stayed by her side, anticipating her needs, following her instructions without question, keeping the anxious mare calm with his steady presence. By the time dawn broke, Grace was exhausted, covered in various fluids she didn't want to think about and watching a miracle, a small but healthy foal nursing from his mother. You did it, Henry said quietly, standing beside her at the stall door. We did it, Grace corrected. I couldn't have kept her calm without you. They stood there in comfortable silence, watching the new life they'd helped bring into the world. Henry's hand found hers, their fingers intertwining naturally, and Grace realized this felt right, more right than anything had in her entire life. I should go shower, she said finally. I'm disgusting. You're beautiful. Grace looked at him incredulously. Henry, I'm covered in... I know what you're covered in, still beautiful. He turned to face her fully, not seeming to care that she was a mess. You spent 8 hours saving lives. You're always beautiful, but right now you're magnificent. Grace felt her eyes prickle with tired tears. You can't say things like that when I'm exhausted and emotional. Why not? Because I might do something impulsive. Like what? His thumb traced circles on her palm, his eyes intense despite the exhaustion in his own face. Like kiss you. Henry's breath caught. That would be terrible. The worst. Absolutely catastrophic. They were leaning closer, the space between them shrinking. Grace could see the flecks of gold in his brown eyes, could count his eyelashes if she wanted to, could feel the warmth of his breath. "Morning, lovebirds." Jake's cheerful voice shattered the moment. "Oh, come on. Did I interrupt again?" "Yes," they said in unison. Jake looked genuinely distressed. "I'm cursed. I have to be cursed. There's no other explanation." He held up a thermos. "Martha sent coffee and says you both need sleep. The foal's stable. Willow's doing great and the world won't end if you take a few hours off." Grace wanted to argue, but exhaustion was catching up with her. Henry looked equally tired, his hair standing up from running his hands through it, shadows under his eyes. "She's right," Henry admitted. "Grace, go sleep. I'll monitor them for a few hours." "You've been up all night, too." "I'll sleep after." His expression was stubborn. "I promise. But you need rest, more than I do right now." Grace was too tired to argue. She stumbled to the guest room, showered and fell into bed still damp from the shower. She woke 6 hours later to find Henry asleep in the armchair by her window. Grace sat up, heart melting. He was still in his clothes from last night, the nice shirt now rumpled and stained, his hair a disaster, head tilted at an angle that was going to give him a wicked neck ache. But he'd stayed, hadn't gone to his own room, hadn't left her alone. She grabbed a blanket and draped it over him gently. He stirred, eyes opening slowly. "Hey," he mumbled, voice rough with sleep. "Hey yourself. What are you doing in here?" "Making sure you were okay." He stretched, wincing, and apparently falling asleep in the world's most uncomfortable chair. "There's a bed right here, you know." "Yeah, but that felt presumptuous." He stood, rolling his shoulders. "Plus, if I'd gotten in bed with you, I'm not sure I would have been able to keep my hands to myself." Grace felt heat flood her cheeks. "Henry, too honest?" He smiled, but there was heat in his eyes. "Sorry. Sleep deprivation removes my filter. Don't apologize." Grace stood, suddenly very aware of the fact that she was wearing only a tank top and sleep shorts. "I like honest." Henry's gaze traveled over her, darkening with appreciation. "Grace, you're making it very hard to be a gentleman." "Maybe I don't want you to be a gentleman." The air between them crackled. Henry took a step toward her, then stopped, jaw clenching. "I need to be clear about something before this goes any further." "Okay?" "When I kiss you, and I will kiss you, Grace, make no mistake about that. I want it to be perfect. Not when we're exhausted. Not when we're covered in barn mess. Not when we're being constantly interrupted." He moved closer, his hand coming up to cup her face. "I want to take my time. I want to do it right. You deserve that." Grace leaned into his touch. "What if I don't need perfect? What if I just need you?" "Grace." Her name was a groan. "You're killing me." "Good." She smiled. "Now go sleep in your own bed before Jake finds us in here and has an aneurysm." Henry laughed, pressing a kiss to her forehead that lingered. "Fair point. But tonight, after the gala fitting, we're finishing at least one of these conversations. Promise?" "Promise." The gala was in 3 days, which meant Grace needed a dress. Martha had insisted on taking her shopping, and somehow Jake had invited himself along, claiming he needed to make sure Henry's future wife looks amazing. "I'm not his future wife," Grace protested for the 3rd time as they entered an expensive boutique in town. "Yet," Martha and Jake said in unison. Grace glared at them both, but she was fighting a smile. The truth was she could see it now, a future with Henry. Mornings in the stable, evenings under the stars, building something real together. "Now, dear," Martha said, steering her toward the evening gown section. "Nothing too revealing. Henry might have a heart attack, but something that shows him exactly what he's been waiting for. You're enjoying this way too much. I've been waiting 20 years to see that boy properly smitten. I'm entitled to enjoy it." Martha pulled out a dress in deep red. "Try this." Grace tried on 7 dresses, each one met with critical assessment from her self-appointed fashion committee. The 8th dress made Martha gasp. "That's the one," she said firmly. Grace looked at herself in the mirror. The dress was elegant but simple, a deep sapphire that brought out her eyes, fitted bodice flowing to a full skirt, one shoulder bare while the other had a delicate sleeve. She felt beautiful, feminine. like she belonged in Henry's world. "Henry's going to swallow his tongue," Jake said with a grin. "Jake!" Martha swatted him. "What? I'm just stating facts." He took a photo with his phone. "I'm sending this to him with the caption, 'You're welcome.'" "Don't you dare," Grace started, but Jake was already typing. His phone rang immediately. Jake answered on speaker. "Hey, boss. Is she still in the store?" Henry's voice was tight. "Yep. I'm buying the dress. Whatever it costs, put it on my account." "Henry, no," Grace protested. "Non-negotiable, Grace. You're going to this gala because of me and my business. I'm buying the dress and shoes and whatever else Martha says you need." Grace snatched the phone from Jake. "Henry Parker, I can buy my own dress. I know you can, but I want to do this, please." His voice softened. "Let me do this one thing. I promise I won't try to take care of everything else. But this one thing, let me." Grace looked at her reflection, at Martha's knowing smile, at Jake's thumbs up. "Fine, but I'm paying for the shoes." "We'll negotiate the shoes later," Henry said, and she could hear his smile. "How does the dress look?" "Like I don't belong in it." "Grace," his voice went serious, "you belong anywhere you choose to be, including by my side at a gala, in case that wasn't clear." Her throat tightened. "It's clear. Good. I'll see you tonight. We still have a conversation to finish." After they hung up, Grace found Martha watching her with soft eyes. "What?" Grace asked. "You love him." It wasn't a question. Grace thought about denying it, but what was the point? "Yeah, I really do." "Good," Martha said, patting her arm. "Because that boy has loved you since the moment you argued with him at 4 in the morning. High time you both admitted it." Grace bought the dress on Henry's account, despite her protests. As they left the boutique, her phone buzzed with a text from Henry. "Jake sent me a picture. You're going to be the most beautiful woman at that gala. Hell, in the entire state. Fair warning, I might not let you out of my sight all night." Grace smiled, typing back, "Is that a threat or a promise?" "Both. Definitely both. 3 more days until the gala. 3 more days until she stood by Henry's side in his world, showing everyone that the poor veterinarian was exactly where she chose to be. And after the gala, they'd finally have that conversation, that kiss, that everything she'd been dreaming about since the moment she'd met him. She could wait 3 more days. Probably. The day before the gala, Grace was checking on Midnight Legacy when Henry appeared with 2 packed saddlebags and a mysterious smile. "Clear your afternoon," he said. "I have appointments. Jake's covering them, Martha's packed lunch, and I'm kidnapping you for a few hours." His smile widened at her expression. "Doctor's orders, actually. Martha says if I don't get you to relax before tomorrow, you'll stress yourself into a nervous breakdown." "I'm not stressed." "You've reorganized the medical supplies 4 times this week and alphabetized the feed room yesterday. You're stressed." He held out his hand. "Come with me. I want to show you something." Grace looked at his outstretched hand, calloused and strong, and offering something that felt like more than just a ride. She took it. They rode out on Silver Song and Midnight Legacy, finally well enough for easy trails. Henry led them away from the main property, through woods Grace hadn't explored yet, until they reached a hidden creek with a small waterfall. "This is—" Grace breathed, taking in the crystal-clear water, the wildflowers, the way sunlight filtered through the trees. "Henry, this is beautiful. It's the only place on the property my grandfather never developed. Said some places are meant to stay wild." Henry dismounted, helping Grace down with hands that lingered on her waist. "I came here the day after his funeral and just sat, trying to figure out how to keep going without him." Grace's heart ached at the vulnerability in his voice. "Did you figure it out?" "Eventually." He spread out a blanket Martha had packed, gesturing for her to sit. "I realized he didn't leave me alone. He left me with everything I needed. The horses, the land, the knowledge, the purpose. I just had to trust it." They unpacked the lunch. Martha had outdone herself again with sandwiches, fruit, cheese, and homemade lemonade. For a while they ate in comfortable silence, listening to the creek bubble over rocks. "Can I ask you something?" Henry said finally. "Anything." "Why veterinary medicine? What made you choose horses specifically?" Grace smiled, memories flooding back. "My dad worked as a ranch hand. We never had money, but horses. Horses didn't care if my clothes were hand-me-downs or if we lived in a tiny apartment. When I was with them, I wasn't the poor kid. I was just me. I understand that, Henry said softly. When I was 12, one of the ranch horses got colic. The vet came and I watched her work. She was so calm, so competent, so respected. And I thought, I want to be that. Grace laughed. My mom said I was crazy. Veterinary school was expensive, the work was hard, and girls like us didn't get those kinds of opportunities. But you didn't listen. I worked 3 jobs, got scholarships, took out loans I'll probably be paying off until I'm 50. Grace met his eyes. But I made it. And every time I save a horse, every time I see a foal take its first steps, I know it was worth it. Henry reached over, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. Your mother was wrong about one thing. What's that? Girls like you, smart, determined, brave, you get every opportunity you fight for because you don't give up. His fingers traced down her jaw. It's one of the things I love most about you. Grace's breath caught. Love. Henry went still, seeming to realize what he'd said. Then his expression settled into something sure and certain. Yes, love. I'm in love with you, Grace Young. Pretty sure I have been since you called me out for having preconceptions and proceeded to prove every assumption I'd ever made was wrong. Henry. Grace's voice was shaky. You don't have to say it back, he said quickly. I know it's fast. I know we've only known each other a few weeks, but I've spent my entire adult life waiting for someone who makes me feel like this, like everything finally makes sense. Like I found the missing piece I didn't know was missing. Grace felt tears spilling over. You idiot. Henry's eyes widened. That's not the response I was hoping for. I love you too. She laughed through her tears. I've been terrified to admit it because it feels too fast, too intense, too everything. But yes, I love you. I love your dedication to your horses, your honesty about your feelings, the way you carry your grandfather's note in your pocket. I love that you respect my work and don't try to fix everything for me. I love... Her voice broke. I love you. Henry's smile was brilliant and relieved and absolutely devastating. He cupped her face with both hands, thumbs wiping away her tears. I'm going to kiss you now. Finally, Grace whispered. But he didn't kiss her. Not yet. Instead, he traced her features with his eyes, memorizing every detail. His thumb brushed over her lower lip, making her shiver. I've been thinking about this for weeks, he murmured. About how you'd taste, how you'd feel, what sounds you'd make. Henry. His name was a plea. I want this to be right, he said softly. I want to remember every second of the first time I kissed the woman I love. Then stop talking and do it already. He laughed, and then finally, his lips touched hers. The kiss was gentle at first, almost tentative, like he was giving her time to pull away. But Grace had no intention of pulling away. She leaned in, her hands fisting in his shirt, kissing him back with all the weeks of pent-up longing. Henry made a sound low in his throat, his control snapping. The kiss deepened, his tongue tracing her lower lip before sliding against hers. His hands tangled in her hair, angling her head for better access. Grace arched against him, desperate to be closer. They finally broke apart, both breathing hard. Henry rested his forehead against hers, his hands still cradling her face like she was something precious. That was... Grace started. Not nearly enough, Henry finished. He kissed her again, slower this time, but no less intense. I could kiss you for hours and still want more. We have hours? Grace smiled against his lips. No emergencies, no interruptions, just us. Just us, Henry agreed, pulling her into his lap. And this creek and this moment and everything I've been waiting for. They spent the afternoon there, kissing and talking and simply being together. Henry told her about his dreams for the breeding program, about wanting to build something sustainable that honored his grandfather's legacy. Grace shared her hopes of opening a full equine medical center one day, where she could train other vets and provide affordable care. We could do it together, Henry said, playing with her fingers. Build something amazing, not just business partners, life partners. Is that a proposal, Mr. Parker? Grace teased. Not yet. He kissed her knuckles. When I propose, and I will, it's going to be properly planned, romantic, perfect. You'll know it's coming and still be surprised by how much thought I put into it. Grace's heart swelled. You've really thought about this. Grace, I think about everything with you. Our future, our life together, growing old in that ridiculous main house with our kids running through the stables. He looked at her seriously. Too much? Too fast? Maybe, Grace admitted. But also exactly what I want. The sun was setting by the time they rode back. Grace sitting in front of Henry on Midnight Legacy, his arms around her, her head resting against his chest. They'd left Silver Song to follow at her own pace, content to graze along the trail. Tomorrow's going to be interesting, Grace said. Tomorrow I get to show the world that the brilliant, beautiful Dr. Young is with me by choice. Henry kissed the top of her head. Let them gossip. Let them judge. You're mine and I'm yours and nothing else matters. Yours, Grace repeated softly, liking the sound of it. I like that. Good, because I'm not letting you go. Ever. When they reached the stables, Jake was waiting with a ridiculous grin. Took you long enough. Did you finally? Yes, Henry said firmly. And before you ask, you owe Martha $20. She picked today. Jake groaned. Of course she did. That woman's psychic. Grace laughed, sliding off the horse into Henry's arms. He held her close for a moment, then kissed her again, not caring that Jake was watching and making exaggerated gagging noises. Tomorrow they'd face the gala. Tomorrow they'd deal with Vivian Ashworth and high society judgment. Tomorrow they'd navigate his world together. But tonight Grace fell asleep knowing she was loved by a man who saw her completely and chose her anyway. And that was better than any fairy tale. Grace stared at her reflection in the full-length mirror, barely recognizing herself. The sapphire dress fit perfectly. Her hair was styled in elegant waves instead of her usual messy bun, and Martha had insisted on doing her makeup, subtle but enough to make her eyes look impossibly large. You look like a princess, Martha said, eyes suspiciously bright. Henry's going to have a heart attack. That's the goal, Jake said from the doorway, then whistled low. Seriously, Grace, you're stunning. I feel ridiculous, Grace admitted, tugging at the dress. What if I trip? What if I use the wrong fork? What if you stop catastrophizing and remember that you're brilliant, beautiful, and dating a man who looks at you like you hung the moon? Martha squeezed her shoulders. You belong there because Henry wants you there. That's all that matters. A knock on the door made Grace's heart leap. Martha opened it to reveal Henry, and Grace's breath simply stopped. He wore a perfectly tailored black tuxedo that emphasized his broad shoulders and lean build. His hair was styled but still slightly messed up in that way that made her want to run her fingers through it. But it was his expression when he saw her that made her knees weak. Pure awe mixed with heat and something that looked a lot like love. Grace, he breathed, walking toward her like she was the only person in the world. You're absolutely breathtaking. You clean up pretty well yourself, she managed, her voice shaky. Henry took her hands, his thumbs brushing over her knuckles. I need to tell you something before we go. Grace's stomach tightened with nerves. Okay? Whatever happens tonight, whatever Vivian says, whatever gossip you hear, whatever judgment gets thrown our way, I need you to remember that I love you, that you're with me because I choose you and you choose me. Nothing anyone says changes that. His eyes were intense, serious. Promise me you'll remember that. I promise, Grace whispered. He kissed her then, soft and sweet and full of promise, not caring that Martha and Jake were watching with ridiculous grins. All right, lovebirds, Jake said. The car's waiting. Go show those snobs what real class looks like. The gala was held at an exclusive country club that made Grace's small-town upbringing feel even more apparent. Crystal chandeliers, marble floors, ice sculptures, and more wealth in one room than she'd seen in her entire life. Henry kept his hand on her lower back, protective and possessive, guiding her through the crowd. People stared. Of course they stared. Grace could practically hear their thoughts. Who is she? Where did she come from? What's Henry Parker doing with someone so ordinary? Ignore them, Henry murmured in her ear. They're just jealous that I found someone real instead of another social climbing bore. Grace laughed despite her nerves. Do you practice these lines, or do they just come naturally? Total improv. I'm very smooth when you're around. You're a dork when I'm around. Also true. He grabbed 2 glasses of champagne from a passing waiter, handing her one. To surviving the next 3 hours without committing murder. Optimistic, Grace said, clinking her glass against his. They made it approximately 20 minutes before Vivian Ashworth found them. She was beautiful in that carefully constructed way, perfect blonde hair, designer dress that probably cost more than Grace's car, and a smile that didn't reach her cold blue eyes. "Henry, darling," she air-kissed both his cheeks, while completely ignoring Grace's existence. "I'm so glad you decided to attend. And you brought a guest." The way she said guest made it sound like Henry had brought a stray dog. "Vivian," Henry said coolly, his hand tightening on Grace's waist. "This is Dr. Grace Young, my girlfriend and the estate's consulting veterinarian. Grace, this is Vivian Ashworth." Grace extended her hand. "It's nice to meet you." Vivian looked at Grace's hand like it might be diseased before offering a limp handshake. A veterinarian. How practical. Her eyes traveled over Grace's dress with thinly veiled disdain. "That's a lovely dress." "Off the rack." "Yes, actually," Grace said pleasantly, refusing to be embarrassed. "I prefer to spend my money on things that matter, like student loans and medical equipment." Henry made a sound that might have been a laugh covered as a cough. Vivian's smile tightened. "How refreshing. Henry, we should discuss the breeding mare, perhaps somewhere more private." "Anything you need to say to me, you can say in front of Grace," Henry said firmly. "Very well." Vivian's expression turned calculating. "The mare is yours on one condition beyond our original agreement. You dance with me. Just one dance for old time's sake." Grace felt Henry tense beside her. She squeezed his hand gently, then looked at Vivian with her sweetest smile. "Of course he'll dance with you, one dance, and then the mare is ours with no further conditions, correct?" Vivian looked surprised that Grace was agreeing. "Correct." "Perfect." Grace turned to Henry. "I'll be at the bar." "Take your time." Henry pulled her aside, his expression concerned. "Grace, I don't have to. It's one dance for a horse you need. I trust you." She kissed his cheek. "Besides, I have a feeling watching you dance with her while clearly wishing you were with me will be more satisfying than any territorial display I could make." Henry's eyes heated. "Have I mentioned how much I love you?" "Once or twice. Now, go dance before I change my mind." Grace watched them take the floor, Vivian pressing unnecessarily close to Henry, who maintained professional distance while looking thoroughly uncomfortable. Other people were watching too, whispering behind their hands. "The poor dear must be mortified," someone said behind Grace. "Henry Parker settling for a veterinarian? His grandfather would be appalled." "I heard she trapped him by saving one of his horses," another voice added. "Classic gold-digger move." Grace's fingers tightened on her champagne glass, but she didn't turn around. She wouldn't give them the satisfaction. "Excuse me, are you Dr. Young?" Grace turned to find an older gentleman with kind eyes and a warm smile. "Yes, I am. Thomas Wellington. I own Riverside Farms about 50 miles from here." He shook her hand firmly. "I've heard excellent things about your work. You saved the Riverside mare's foal last year when my regular vet said it was hopeless." Grace remembered the case. "The breech birth with complications. How are they doing?" "Thriving, thanks to you." Thomas gestured to the dance floor. "I see you're here with Henry. He's a good man, despite what some of these vultures might say." "He's the best man I know," Grace said honestly. "Good answer." Thomas smiled. "And for what it's worth, his grandfather would have adored you. Joseph Parker valued hard work and genuine character over pedigree any day. He'd be thrilled Henry found someone who loves the horses as much as the man." Grace felt her eyes sting with grateful tears. "Thank you. That means more than you know." As Thomas excused himself, Grace noticed the dance had ended. Henry was extricating himself from Vivian's grasp and heading straight for Grace with single-minded determination. "My turn," he said, taking her hand and pulling her onto the dance floor. The music shifted to something slow and romantic. Henry pulled Grace close, one hand splayed possessively on her lower back, the other cradling her hand against his chest. "You okay?" he asked quietly. "Better now." Grace leaned her head against his shoulder, breathing in his familiar scent. "Though I heard some interesting gossip about what a gold digger I am." Henry's hand tightened on her waist. "Who said that?" "Doesn't matter. They're wrong, and we know it. That's enough." She pulled back to look at him. "Thomas Wellington told me your grandfather would have loved me." "He would have." Henry's expression softened. "He would have loved how you challenge me, how you care for the horses, how you don't take any of my crap. I take some of your crap. Very little of my crap, Henry corrected, spinning her expertly, which is exactly why I love you. They danced through 2 more songs, oblivious to the stares and whispers. When the music ended, Henry led her out to a private terrace overlooking the grounds. We can leave if you want, he said. We secured the mare. We don't owe these people anything. Grace considered it, then shook her head. No, if we leave now, it looks like they won. Like we're ashamed. I'm not ashamed of being with you, Henry. I'm definitely not ashamed of being with you. He cupped her face, kissing her thoroughly, not caring who might see. You're the best thing that's ever happened to me. Even better than champion horses? Way better than champion horses, he grinned. Though don't tell them that. They get jealous. Grace laughed, and the tension of the evening melted away. This was what mattered, not the gossip or the judgment, but this man who loved her completely and wasn't afraid to show it. They returned to the gala, heads high, and spent the rest of the evening proving to everyone that they belonged together. Henry introduced her to respected breeders who knew her work and reputation. Grace charmed the genuine people and ignored the petty ones, and whenever someone got too rude or presumptuous, Henry shut them down with quiet authority that made Grace's heart race. By the time they left, Grace was exhausted but triumphant. That wasn't as terrible as I feared, she admitted in the car. You were magnificent, Henry said, pulling her against his side. Watching you hold your own, refuse to be intimidated, and still be gracious to the people who deserved it. I've never been more attracted to you. Careful, Mr. Parker. That sounds like you're planning something. Maybe I am. His hand slid up her thigh, his eyes dark with promise. Maybe I'm planning to show you exactly how proud I am of you when we get home. Grace's breath hitched. Henry? Unless you're too tired. His thumb traced circles on her inner thigh. We can wait. I'm not too tired, Grace said quickly, and his laugh was low and full of promise. Tonight had been a test and they'd passed it together. Tomorrow, they'd deal with business contracts and breeding programs and all the practical matters. But tonight was just for them. Grace woke in Henry's bed, wrapped in expensive sheets and even more expensive arms. Sunlight streamed through the windows, and she could hear horses nickering in the distance. Her favorite alarm clock. Henry was still asleep, his face relaxed and younger without the weight of responsibility he usually carried. Grace traced his jawline gently, marveling that this was real, that she was allowed to have this. Last night had been... She felt her cheeks heat just remembering. Henry had been tender and passionate, reverent and playful, taking his time to worship every inch of her like she was something precious. They'd talked and laughed and made love again as the sun came up, and Grace had never felt more cherished in her entire life. I can feel you watching me, Henry mumbled, eyes still closed, a smile playing at his lips. Can't help it. You're annoyingly handsome when you sleep. Just when I sleep? He cracked one eye open. All the time, unfortunately. It's very distracting. Henry pulled her closer, nuzzling her neck. Good. You're distracting too. Constantly. I've almost walked into stall doors at least 6 times because I was too busy watching you work. Grace laughed, the sound turning into a gasp as his lips found a sensitive spot below her ear. Henry, we should get up. The horses... Jake's got them. I told him not to disturb us until at least noon. His hand slid down her side, leaving heat in its wake. Which gives us... He checked the clock. Approximately 4 more hours to stay exactly where we are. 4 hours? Grace pretended to consider. However will we fill the time? I have some ideas, Henry said, rolling her beneath him, and Grace stopped thinking about anything except how much she loved this man. It was closer to 1 in the afternoon when they finally emerged, both thoroughly satisfied and wearing matching grins that made Jake groan dramatically. Seriously? That's the face you're both going to wear now? The "we had amazing sex and we're not sorry" face? He shook his head. Martha owes me another $20. I said you'd make it to the bedroom last night. She said you wouldn't make it past the front door. We made it to the bedroom, Henry said with dignity. Eventually, Grace added, her cheeks flaming. Jake cackled. I love you guys. You're terrible at hiding things. Also, Henry, your lawyer called 4 times. Something about contracts from last night. Henry's expression shifted to business mode. The breeding mare purchase. I need to review the terms before signing. He kissed Grace's forehead. I'll be in my office for about an hour. Want to check on Willow's dream and the foal? Already planning to, Grace said. She watched him head to the main house, her heart full to bursting. This was her life now. This man, these horses, this place. It felt too good to be true, which should have been her first warning. An hour later, Grace had finished her rounds and was heading back to the main house to find Henry when she heard his voice through the partially open office window. He was on the phone, pacing as he talked. She should have kept walking, should have given him privacy, but something in his tone made her pause. I understand your concern, Henry was saying, his voice tight with frustration, but I would never treat someone as a casual conquest, especially not someone who works alongside me. That would be disrespectful and completely against everything I believe in. Grace felt her blood run cold. The power dynamic alone makes it inappropriate, Henry continued. Anyone who pursues an employee or business partner romantically without considering the implications is taking advantage. It's unethical and... Grace didn't hear the rest. Her ears were ringing, her heart shattering into pieces sharp enough to cut. He was talking about her, about them, saying it was inappropriate, unethical, that the power dynamic made their relationship wrong. All those whispers at the gala flooded back. Gold digger, trapped him, not good enough for his world. They'd been right, and Henry had finally realized it. Grace turned and walked, ran, back to the guest room she'd barely used in weeks. Her hands shook as she pulled out her duffel bag and started throwing clothes into it. Martha appeared in the doorway. Grace, what's wrong? I need to leave. Grace's voice was surprisingly steady, despite the tears streaming down her face. Leave? But you and Henry were a mistake. Grace zipped the bag viciously. A beautiful, stupid mistake that I should have seen coming. Grace, talk to me. What happened? I heard him, Martha, on the phone, talking about how inappropriate it is to pursue someone who works for you, how the power dynamic makes it unethical. She laughed bitterly. All this time I thought he saw me as an equal, but I'm just his employee, someone he got carried away with and now regrets. That can't be right. I heard him say it. Grace's voice broke. He thinks our relationship is inappropriate, that he shouldn't have, that we shouldn't have. She couldn't finish the sentence. Martha looked stricken. Let me get Henry. There's been a misunderstanding. No. Grace picked up her bag. No more confrontations, no more humiliation. I'm going to do what I should have done weeks ago, leave with my dignity intact. She sat at the small desk and pulled out paper, her hand shaking as she wrote, Henry, thank you for the opportunity to work with Parker Estate. However, I feel it's best if I resign my position as consulting veterinarian effective immediately. I apologize for any inconvenience this may cause. I wish you and the breeding program all the best. Dr. Grace Young, professional, distant, like the last few weeks had never happened. Martha was crying now. Grace, please don't do this. Talk to him. I can't. Grace's voice was small, broken. I can't stand there and watch him tell me this was all a mistake, that I was a mistake. I can't. She left the letter on the kitchen counter where Henry would find it, hugged Martha quickly, and walked out to her truck before her courage failed. Jake appeared as she was loading her bag. Whoa, where are you going? Home. Grace climbed into the driver's seat. But Henry, tell him goodbye for me. She started the engine, not looking at Jake's confused face. If she looked, she'd break down completely. The drive back to her apartment took 40 minutes. 40 minutes of tears and shattered dreams, and the knowledge that she'd been right to be afraid. She didn't belong in Henry's world. Last night at the gala had proven that, and now he'd finally realized it too. Her phone started ringing the moment she pulled into her apartment complex. Henry's name lit up the screen. Grace turned off her phone. She couldn't talk to him, couldn't hear him try to let her down gently, to explain that it had been fun but ultimately inappropriate. Her pride was in shreds, but she could at least spare herself that final humiliation. Grace dragged herself up the stairs to her tiny apartment, so small and shabby after the elegance of Parker Estate. She dropped her bag, collapsed on her second-hand couch, and finally let herself sob. She'd fallen in love with a man from a different world. She'd let herself believe in fairy tales and happily ever afters, and she'd had her heart shattered for her naivety. The worst part? She couldn't even regret loving him. Henry Parker had been worth the risk, worth the pain, worth everything, even if he didn't feel the same way about her. At Parker Estate, Henry finished his phone call with his lawyer, a conversation about ensuring the new breeding mare contract protected against anyone claiming romantic involvement, influenced business decisions, something the lawyer had insisted on after Vivian's obvious manipulation attempts. He ended the call feeling satisfied that his relationship with Grace was completely separate from any business dealings, that no one could ever accuse her of impropriety or him of favoritism. She deserved that protection, that respect. Henry headed downstairs to find Grace, eager to tell her the mare contract was finalized and they could focus on bringing her home next week. Instead, he found Martha crying at the kitchen table, Jake standing nearby looking shell-shocked, and a letter with Grace's handwriting. "What happened?" Henry demanded, already reading the resignation letter, his heart dropping into his stomach. "She left," Martha said through tears. "She overheard your phone call and she thought you were talking about her, about how inappropriate your relationship is." Henry's world tilted. "What? No. I was talking about Vivian, about making sure no one could claim Grace influenced the mare purchase. I was protecting her reputation." "She didn't hear that part," Jake said quietly. "She only heard you say pursuing someone who works for you is unethical, and she thought—" He didn't finish, but he didn't need to. Henry was already moving, grabbing his keys. "Where did she go?" "Her apartment, probably," Martha said. "Henry, she was devastated, completely heartbroken. She wouldn't listen to anything I said. I need to fix this." Henry was halfway to the door when his phone rang, the breeding farm manager. "Not now." "Sir, it's Midnight Legacy. He's down in his stall. We can't get him up." Henry froze, torn between the woman he loved and the horse that meant everything. "Call the emergency vet." "We did. She's 2 hours away. Henry, he's bad, really bad." Henry looked at Martha, at Jake, at the letter in his hand. Then he made the only decision he could. "Call Grace," he said. "Keep calling until she answers. Tell her." His voice broke. "Tell her Midnight needs her, please." Then he ran to the stables, his heart in pieces, praying that the woman he loved would come back, even if only for the horse. Grace's phone had been ringing non-stop for 20 minutes. She'd ignored every call, every text, buried under blankets on her couch like that would somehow protect her from the pain. Then Martha's number appeared for the 15th time, followed immediately by a text. "Midnight is down. Critical. Won't get up. Other vet 2 hours away. He needs you. Please." Grace's heart stopped. Then she was moving, grabbing her emergency kit, running to her truck, every rational thought about protecting her heart forgotten. Midnight needed her. That was all that mattered. She made the 40-minute drive in 25, her hands white-knuckled on the steering wheel. Professional Grace was in control now. Calm, focused, ready. Heartbroken Grace could fall apart later. She found the stable in controlled chaos. Jake was on the phone with the emergency vet. Martha was pacing, and Henry. Henry was in Midnight's stall, kneeling beside the stallion, his hand on the horse's neck, speaking in low, soothing tones. His face was pale, jaw tight, and Grace could see the fear and helplessness in every line of his body. "Grace!" Jake spotted her first. "Thank God." Henry's head snapped up, and the relief that flooded his expression was quickly replaced by something more complicated. Hope, fear, desperate longing. "You came." "Where else would I be?" Grace said, her voice professionally cool as she entered the stall. She couldn't think about them right now, couldn't think about her broken heart or his words or any of it. "What are his symptoms?" Henry stood, giving her room, his eyes never leaving her face. "He went down about an hour ago. Won't stand. Breathing is labored. He's sweating and his gums are pale." Grace did a rapid assessment, her hands moving efficiently over the stallion. Elevated heart rate, distended abdomen, obvious signs of pain. Colic. Severe. Possibly a twisted intestine. She looked up at Henry. "We need to get him up and walking. If we can't, he'll need surgery. Tell me what to do." They worked together seamlessly, falling into the rhythm they'd developed over weeks of partnership. Grace administered pain medication and fluids, while Henry coaxed and encouraged Midnight to stand. Jake assisted, following Grace's instructions without question. 30 minutes felt like hours. Grace's entire focus was on the horse, on saving him, on not thinking about how close Henry was or how his presence made her ache. Finally, Midnight struggled to his feet. Grace's relief was palpable. "Keep him walking," she instructed Henry. "Slow circles. I'll monitor his vitals." Henry led Midnight in gentle circuits, while Grace tracked every change, every sign of improvement or decline. The stallion's condition slowly stabilized, the immediate crisis passing. 2 hours later, Midnight was resting comfortably. Pain managed, danger averted. Grace finished her notes with hands that were only slightly trembling. "He'll need monitoring for the next 24 hours, she said, still not looking at Henry. "I've left instructions with Jake. The emergency vet should be here within the hour for follow-up. I need to go." "Grace, please." Henry's voice was rough, desperate. "We need to talk." "There's nothing to talk about." Grace packed her kit with unnecessary force. "I heard what you said, Henry, loud and clear. You heard half a conversation out of context?" He moved between her and the door, not touching but blocking her escape. "I wasn't talking about you. About us. You said pursuing someone who works for you is inappropriate and unethical. I was talking about ensuring the breeding mare contract protected you." Henry's frustration broke through. "My lawyer was concerned that Vivian or others might claim you influenced my business decisions. I was telling him that I would never treat someone as a casual conquest, especially someone who works alongside me. I was protecting your reputation, Grace." Grace froze, her mind reeling. "What?" "The conversation was about making sure no one could ever accuse you of using our relationship for professional gain, about keeping our personal life completely separate from business so your reputation and credentials remain untarnished." Henry ran his hands through his hair, looking wrecked. "I was protecting you, not rejecting you." "But you said the power dynamic makes it crucial that I'm careful, that I make it crystal clear to everyone that you're with me because we love each other, not because you're my employee or I'm your client, that your professional achievements stand on their own merit." His eyes were pleading. "Grace, I was trying to do right by you." The pieces clicked into place, the context she'd missed, the protection he'd been trying to provide. "Oh, God," Grace whispered, sinking onto a hay bale. "I'm an idiot." "You're not an idiot. You heard something that sounded bad and jumped to a reasonable conclusion." Henry crouched in front of her, his hands hovering near her knees like he was afraid to touch. "But Grace, you have to know, you have to believe that I love you. That last night was the most perfect night of my life. That every word I've said about our future, I meant." "I was so scared," Grace admitted, tears spilling over. "At the gala, I heard people saying I wasn't good enough for you, that I'd trapped you. And then I heard you on the phone and I panicked." "You're too good for me," Henry said fiercely. "You're brilliant and kind and brave and you save lives. You walked into my world at 4 in the morning and turned everything upside down in the best possible way. If anything, I'm terrified that you'll realize you deserve better. Better than a man who loves me completely, who respects my work, who looks at me like I'm his whole world." Grace touched his face, her heart cracking open all over again. "There is no better, Henry." He surged forward, cupping her face and kissing her with desperate relief and apology and love. Grace kissed him back just as fiercely, her hands fisting in his shirt, trying to convey everything she felt. When they broke apart, both breathing hard, Henry rested his forehead against hers. "Don't leave me again, please. Even if you hear something that scares you, come to me first. Let me explain. Give me a chance to fix it." "I promise," Grace whispered. "I'm sorry I ran. I should have trusted you. I'm sorry I didn't make sure you understood what I was doing, that you knew beyond any doubt how I feel about you." He kissed her again, gentler this time. "I love you, Grace Young. Not despite the power dynamic or the class difference or any of that bullshit. I love you because you're you, and that's all that matters. I love you too." Grace smiled through her tears. "Even when you're being overprotective about my reputation, someone has to protect it. You're too busy saving horses to care about gossip." He helped her stand, pulling her into his arms. "Stay, please, not just tonight, but always. Move in. Make this your home. Let's build that future we talked about." Grace thought about her tiny apartment, about going back to a life without Henry, without these horses, without this place that had become home. Yes, 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 I'll stay. Yes, I'll move in. Yes to all of it. She grinned up at him. "But you're helping me pack my apartment." I'll hire movers. Henry. Right. I'll help you pack personally. Got it. He kissed the top of her head. Come on. Let's check on midnight one more time. Then I'm taking you to bed and not letting you leave it for at least 12 hours. Sounds perfect, Grace said, lacing her fingers through his. As they walked back to Midnight's stall, Jake and Martha were waiting with matching grins. About time you two figured it out, Jake said. That was the worst 3 hours of my life. 3 hours? Grace blinked. I thought I'd been gone longer. Felt like years, Henry said quietly, squeezing her hand. Martha pulled Grace into a fierce hug. Don't you dare run away again. This family needs you. I'm not going anywhere, Grace promised, and she meant it. This was where she belonged, not because Henry's world had accepted her, but because she and Henry had built their own world together, one based on love, respect, and shared dreams, and that was worth more than all the galas and gossip in the world. 3 weeks after the misunderstanding, Grace's belongings were scattered across Henry's bedroom, their bedroom now, in various states of unpacking. She'd been living at the estate officially for 2 weeks, and it already felt more like home than anywhere she'd ever lived. Why do you own 17 different medical journals from 2019? Henry asked, holding up a stack he'd found in a box labeled Important. Because there were significant advances in equine cardiology that year, Grace said, not looking up from where she was organizing her clothes in the walk-in closet Henry had cleared for her. And why do you own 12 black Henley shirts that look identical? They're not identical. This one is charcoal, this one is slate, this one is... They're all black, Henry. Charcoal is not black. He caught the pillow she threw at him, grinning. Fine, they're all black. I like black. I've noticed. Grace emerged from the closet, surveying the chaos. We have too much stuff. We're consolidating 2 lives into one space. Of course we have too much stuff. Henry set down the journals and pulled her into his arms. But I like your stuff mixed with my stuff. Makes it feel real. Grace settled against his chest, breathing in his scent. It is real, right? This isn't some prolonged dream I'm going to wake up from? If it is, I'm having the same dream, so we'll figure it out together. He kissed the top of her head. Besides, Martha would kill me if I let you leave again. She's already planning our wedding. She showed me her Pinterest board, Grace admitted. It's extensive. Should I be worried? Depends. How do you feel about releasing doves and a 12-tier cake? Henry's horrified expression made her laugh. She's kidding, right? Mostly. Grace kissed his jaw. But we should probably have the when are we actually getting married conversation before she books a venue. Fair point. Henry's arms tightened around her. What do you want, Grace? Big wedding? Small ceremony? Running away to Vegas? Honestly, I just want to marry you. The how doesn't matter as much as the who. She pulled back to look at him. But maybe something at the estate, with the horses nearby, nothing too formal. That sounds perfect. His eyes were warm. Want to know what I want? What? I want to wake up next to you every morning. Want to work alongside you every day. Want to build this breeding program together. Open that equine medical center you dream about. Maybe add a few kids to the chaos eventually. He cupped her face gently. I want everything, Grace, the whole messy, beautiful, complicated everything. Grace's eyes stung with happy tears. Kids? 2 or 3, if you want them. Teach them to ride, to care for animals, to be decent humans. He smiled. Little girls with your eyes and stubbornness. Boys with your brilliant mind and terrible habit of arguing with me. I don't argue. I engage in spirited debate. See? That. He kissed her, cutting off her protest. That's exactly what I'm talking about. A knock on the door interrupted them. If you two are done being disgustingly cute, we have a situation, Jake called. They found him in the stable, looking amused and exasperated in equal measure. The new breeding mare arrived early. Vivian delivered her personally. She's currently holding court in the main barn, demanding to see Henry. Grace and Henry exchanged looks. Of course she is, Henry muttered. Vivian was indeed in the main barn, dressed inappropriately for a stable in designer heels and a white suit. The mare, a stunning chestnut, stood nervously in the cross ties while Vivian chatted with Jake like she owned the place. Henry, darling. Vivian air-kissed his cheeks, completely ignoring Grace's presence. I thought I'd deliver Morning Star personally, make sure she settles in properly. That's unnecessary, Henry said coolly. We have experienced staff. But I wanted to ensure... Vivian's eyes finally landed on Grace, who was wearing work jeans, boots, and one of Henry's Henley shirts. "Oh, you're still here. I live here," Grace said pleasantly. "Nice to see you again, Vivian." Vivian's smile was arctic. How cozy. Playing house with the help. Grace felt Henry tense beside her, but she put a hand on his arm. "Actually, I'm designing the layout for the new equine medical center we're building on the property. It'll serve as both a teaching facility and a full-service hospital. Henry and I are co-directors." That was news to Henry, based on his surprised expression, but he recovered quickly. "That's right. Grace's expertise combined with the estate's resources. We're breaking ground in the spring." Vivian's mask slipped for a moment, showing genuine shock. "A medical center?" "Dr. Young's reputation is nationally recognized," Henry continued, his arm sliding around Grace's waist possessively. "Having her here full-time is an incredible asset to the breeding program and the equine community as a whole." "I see." Vivian's tone suggested she saw entirely too much. "Well, I should go. Enjoy your project." As she click-clacked away in her ridiculous heels, Jake whistled low. "Did you two actually plan that medical center, or did Grace just improvise brilliantly?" "Improvised," Grace admitted, "but now that I've said it out loud, it's actually a great idea." Henry was staring at her like she'd hung the moon. "An equine medical center, teaching facility here. Too presumptuous." Grace worried she'd overstepped. "It's perfect." He kissed her thoroughly, not caring that Jake was watching. "You're perfect. We're building it. Whatever you need, whatever it takes. Henry, that's a huge investment. It's our future, our legacy, something we build together." His eyes were bright with excitement. "We could have internship programs, bring in specialists, serve the whole region. Grace, this could be incredible. We'd need to plan carefully, secure funding, hire staff. So we plan. We have time." He grinned at her. "Besides, I like the idea of co-directors. Has a nice ring to it." "Better than boss and employee?" Grace teased. "Way better." He kissed her again. "Equal partners in everything. That's how this works." Jake cleared his throat. "I hate to interrupt the romance, but Morningstar needs to be checked over and settled in. Also, Martha made lunch and says if you two don't eat, she's force-feeding you." "We should eat," Grace agreed reluctantly. "And finish unpacking," Henry added, "and check on Willow's dream, and review the breeding schedule, and somehow find time to actually plan this medical center." They looked at each other and laughed. This was their life now, chaos and horses and dreams being built in real time. It was messy and complicated and absolutely perfect. "I love you," Grace said, standing on tiptoe to kiss him. "I love you too," Henry replied against her lips. "Even when you improvise major construction projects during arguments with my ex-dates." "Especially then," Grace corrected, and his laugh was the best sound she'd ever heard. They had work to do, plans to make, a future to build. But first, lunch with Martha, checking on horses and maybe stealing a few more kisses when Jake wasn't looking. Life at Parker Estate was everything Grace had never known she wanted, and she was never letting it go. 6 months had passed since Grace moved into Parker Estate, and life had settled into a beautiful rhythm. The Equine Medical Center was in its planning stages, with architects and contractors reviewing Grace's detailed specifications. The breeding program was thriving, with Morningstar expecting her first foal in the spring, and Grace and Henry had fallen into a partnership that worked both professionally and personally, which made what Henry was planning both easier and terrifying. "You're pacing again," Jake observed from where he sat on the paddock fence. "You've worn a track in the grass." "I'm not pacing, I'm thinking," Henry corrected, but he stopped walking. "About how to propose to Grace without having a panic attack?" Martha appeared with lemonade, her eyes twinkling. "Because you're overthinking this, dear." "I'm not overthinking." "You've changed the plan 8 times in 2 weeks," Jake said. "First it was during the championship show, then at the medical center groundbreaking, then at Christmas, then New Year's, then—" "I know what the plans were," Henry said tightly. "I want it to be perfect. She deserves perfect." "She deserves you, not perfection," Martha said gently. "That girl loves you when you're muddy from the stables, when you're frustratingly overprotective, when you burn dinner trying to be romantic. She doesn't need a grand gesture. She just needs you to ask." Henry pulled the small velvet box from his pocket, opening it to reveal the ring he'd had custom made. A sapphire, the color of the dress she'd worn to the gala, surrounded by small diamonds that caught the light like stars. Simple, elegant, and unmistakably Grace. What if she says no? The fear he'd been carrying for weeks finally emerged. Then she's an idiot, which we all know she isn't, Jake said firmly. Henry, that woman moved her entire life here. She's planning a medical center with you. She wears your ring on her right hand already, that promise ring you gave her last month. She's not going to say no. But what if, boss, I love you, but shut up and go propose before I do it for you. Jake hopped off the fence. She's in the old barn going through your grandfather's journals. Perfect place, perfect moment. Go. Henry looked at Martha, who nodded encouragingly. That boy's right for once. Stop planning and start doing. Henry pocketed the ring and headed toward the old barn, his heart hammering. He'd faced business negotiations, difficult buyers, championship competitions, but nothing had ever terrified him quite like this moment. He found Grace sitting on the floor of his grandfather's old office, surrounded by journals, completely absorbed in reading. She'd pulled her hair into a messy bun, wore jeans with a hole in the knee and one of his old flannel shirts, and looked absolutely beautiful. Find anything interesting? He asked from the doorway. Grace looked up, her face lighting up in that way that never failed to make his heart stutter. Henry, your grandfather documented a mare with symptoms almost identical to what Morning Star's showing. If we follow his protocol, we might be able to prevent complications during her foaling. That's brilliant. Henry sat beside her, looking at the journal entry. He was meticulous about documentation. He was amazing, Grace said softly. I wish I could have met him. He would have loved you. Henry set aside the journal, turning to face her fully. Grace, can I ask you something? Of course. Why do you love me? Grace blinked, surprised. That's a weird question. Humor me. She studied his face, seeing something serious beneath the casual question. I love you because you care deeply about everything you do. Because you're not afraid to be vulnerable with me. Because you make me laugh when I'm stressed and challenge me when I'm being stubborn. She took his hand. Because you see me, really see me, and love me anyway. Why? Because I need to know if you love me enough to marry me. Grace's breath caught. Henry? He pulled out the ring box, opening it to reveal the sapphire. I know we've talked about marriage. I know we've made vague plans for someday, but I don't want someday anymore, Grace. I want now. I want to wake up every morning knowing you're my wife. I want to build this medical center together as partners in every sense. I want kids with your brilliant mind and your stubborn streak. I want 50 years of arguments and laughter and saving horses together. Tears were streaming down Grace's face. You're really doing this in your grandfather's barn? It's where I fell in love with horses, where I learned what really matters, where I spent hours trying to figure out how to keep his legacy alive. Henry's voice roughened. And now it's where I'm asking the love of my life to build a new legacy with me. Seems appropriate. You romantic idiot, Grace said, laughing through tears. Yes, I'll marry you. I'll build 50 legacies with you if you want. I'll argue with you every day and save horses and have babies and all of it. Yes. Henry slid the ring onto her finger with shaking hands, then pulled her into his arms, kissing her with relief and joy and overwhelming love. Grace kissed him back just as fiercely, her hands tangling in his hair, both of them laughing and crying at the same time. It fits perfectly, Grace said, admiring the ring through her tears. I had Martha steal one of your rings to get the size. Henry grinned. She's been in on this for weeks. Of course she has. Grace kissed him again. Can we tell them now? Because she's probably watching from the house with binoculars. Actually, she and Jake are waiting at the main barn with champagne. Henry stood, pulling Grace up with him. I may have planned this part. Only this part? Grace teased. The other 8 plans were too complicated. This one felt right. He laced his fingers through hers. Ready to celebrate? With you? Always. They walked back to the main barn hand in hand, where Martha and Jake were indeed waiting with champagne and ridiculous grins. Finally, Jake shouted. Martha, you win the bet again. I thought he'd chicken out. I had faith, Martha said, pulling Grace into a fierce hug. Welcome to the family officially, dear. I've been part of this family since I showed up at 4 in the morning, Grace said, but she hugged back just as tightly. Henry popped the champagne, pouring glasses for everyone. To Grace, for saying yes to my chaotic life. To Henry, For making that chaos worthwhile, Grace countered. To both of you for giving this old woman hope, Martha added. And to me, for being the best wingman ever, Jake finished, making everyone laugh. As they toasted and celebrated, Grace looked around at the stables, at the horses nickering in their stalls, at Martha and Jake who'd become family, at Henry who looked at her like she was his entire world. This was home. This was family. This was everything she'd never known she needed. And in 3 months, because Martha had already booked the venue and the caterer and apparently half the planning, she'd marry the man she loved in the place where their story began. Life, Grace decided, was pretty damn perfect. 14 months later, Grace stood in the doorway of the main stable, one hand resting on her very pregnant belly, watching her husband work with a skittish 2-year-old colt. Even after a year of marriage, the word husband still gave her a little thrill. Their wedding had been perfect. Small ceremony under the oak trees where they'd had their first real conversation, surrounded by horses and the people they loved. Martha had cried through the entire ceremony. Jake had given a best man speech that was equal parts embarrassing stories and genuine emotion. And Henry had written his own vows that left everyone in tears, promising to love her through every challenge, every triumph, every ordinary day. Grace had promised the same, adding that she'd try to stop reorganizing his office when she was stressed. Henry had laughed through his tears, knowing she absolutely would not stop. "You're supposed to be resting," Henry called, spotting her. "Doctor's orders." "I'm resting, I'm just resting standing up." Grace walked, waddled really, at 8 months pregnant, toward the paddock. "And I'm a doctor, so I'm overriding those orders." "That's not how it works." But Henry was smiling as he handed the colt to Jake and came to her, his hand automatically finding her belly. "How are you feeling? Is she moving?" "She's using my ribs as a trampoline." Grace covered his hand with hers. "But yes, we're both fine, just wanted to see you." Henry kissed her forehead, then crouched to kiss her belly. "Your mother is supposed to be taking it easy, little one. Can you help me convince her?" The baby kicked, right where his hand was. Henry's expression of wonder never got old. "She's got your stubborn streak already," he said, standing and pulling Grace close as her belly allowed. "Good. She'll need it with you as a father." Grace leaned into him, breathing in his familiar scent. "The medical center looks amazing. They finished the surgery suite today." The Parker Young Equine Medical Center had opened 6 months ago and was already making waves in the veterinary community. Grace ran it as head veterinarian while teaching interns and residents. Henry handled the business side while continuing the breeding program. They'd created something neither could have built alone, a legacy combining his grandfather's passion with her medical expertise. "Speaking of which," Henry said, "that residency program you designed, Stanford called, they want to model their program after ours." Grace's eyes widened. "Seriously? Seriously, my brilliant wife is revolutionizing equine medicine." He kissed her temple. "I'm sickeningly proud of you." "We built this together," Grace reminded him. "I couldn't have done any of it without you." "Partners," Henry agreed. "In everything." A truck pulled up to the main house, and Grace recognized her mother's car. Her parents visited regularly now, her father working part-time at the estate when his old ranch needed extra help. Her younger brother was in his final year of veterinary school, funded by a scholarship Grace and Henry had established in her father's name. "Mom's here." Grace's mother, Sarah, emerged from the car carrying bags of what was undoubtedly baby clothes. "I found the most adorable little boots." "Mom, she doesn't need more boots. She doesn't even have feet yet," Grace protested, but she was smiling. "Everyone needs boots," Sarah said firmly, hugging her daughter. "How's my granddaughter?" "Active. Takes after her father." "Hey," Henry protested. "She takes after both of us. Perfect combination." Martha appeared from the main house, wiping flour from her hands. "Is that baby Grace kicking? I felt something." "You're across the yard, Martha. You can't feel her kicking," Grace laughed. "Grandmother's intuition." Martha's eyes were soft. Joseph would have loved this. A baby on the estate, the medical center thriving, his grandson happy. Henry's arm tightened around Grace. He'd have loved Grace most of all. They spent the afternoon as a family. Henry's chosen family and Grace's blood family, all mixed together in the beautiful chaos of their life. Jake stopped by with his new girlfriend, a riding instructor from the next county over. Grace's brother video-called from school to share his latest case study. Her father and Henry discussed training techniques while working with the horses. As the sun set, Grace found herself back under their oak tree. Henry behind her, his arms wrapped around her and their daughter. Tired, he murmured into her hair. Exhausted, happy, overwhelmed, all of it. Grace leaned back against his chest. Remember when I showed up here at 4 in the morning? Best emergency call I've ever made. Henry's hands spread across her belly. You saved Midnight's life and completely destroyed my carefully ordered existence. Sorry about that. Don't be. My carefully ordered existence was lonely and pointless. He turned her gently to face him, one hand cupping her face. You gave me everything I didn't know I needed. Love, partnership, purpose, family. You made this place a home instead of just a business. You did the same for me, Grace said softly. I had a career but not a life. You gave me both. Their daughter kicked again, as if reminding them she was part of this too. Henry laughed, his hand returning to Grace's belly. 3 months until we meet her, he said with wonder. 3 months until our lives get even more chaotic, Grace corrected. Can't wait. Henry kissed her, slow and sweet and full of promise. I love you, Grace Parker. I love you too, Grace whispered against his lips. My irritatingly perfect husband. Irritating? You reorganized my medical supplies by color instead of type. It was very irritating. They look better by color. They're less functional by color. We're going to argue about this for the rest of our lives, aren't we? Henry was grinning. Probably. That okay with you? That's everything to me. He kissed her again. You. This life, our daughter, the horses, the arguments, all of it. It's everything. Grace looked at the stables, at the medical center bearing their combined names, at the house where Martha was probably already starting dinner. She felt their daughter moving, felt Henry's arms around her, felt the absolute certainty that she was exactly where she belonged. Yeah, she agreed, smiling. It's everything. And as the sun set over Parker Estate, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink, Grace Young Parker knew that some fairy tales were real. They just started with a 4 a.m. emergency call, a dying horse, and a man stubborn enough to love her completely. The rest was just the beginning of their happily ever after. Leave your comment and share this story with someone special. It truly helps us keep bringing new stories to you. And if you want to follow every chapter of this emotional journey, subscribe to the channel and turn on the notification bell. Your support makes all the difference.